Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson in the Johnson edition. We turned out a poem 456, So Well That I Can Live Without. And the second line will be, I Love Thee. Let's just put it in our notes right away. This is another one of what we will call the master poems, where Emily is writing to declare her love for someone we do not know who. There's all kinds of arguments about who it is that she will say in this poem she is in love with. And in fact, possibly a almost like blasphemous love, as we'll get into the religious language of this poem. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our preceding 455 poems and our study together of those poems, because that will allow you to place this poem in league with those other poems. We've mentioned several of the master poems already. We just did 455, triumph maybe of several kinds. Notice here the hyperbolic language, the over-the-top language. Notice as well that we are back in another comparison poem where Emily is going to work very briefly and yet make a powerful statement that some will argue is very close to blasphemy theologically. Let's read the poem. So well that I can live without, I love thee. Then how well is that? As well as Jesus? Prove it me that he loved men as I love thee. Well, it's clear that Emily is playing around with the John 3:16 passage, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, right? This idea of how much do I love thee? Whoever the thee is going to be our first question. Who is it that she is in fact celebrating her love for? We don't know. Again, we'll often call it the master, the individual in her life to whom she owes greatest allegiance. Is it Boyles? Is it Higginson? Who is it? We don't know. She says it this way though. So well that I can live without, I love thee. Now, this can be easily connected to the preceding poem of 455. In other words, there are things she says I can live without. There's things I can't live without. And in regards to triumphs, this is one of those I can't live without. In other words, I'm totally devoted to you. And then she'll say it. I love thee, right? Now, this will, of course, make us think immediately of Browning's Sonnets of the Portuguese, How Do I Love Thee, Let Me Count the Ways, and all of that. Then how well is that? Notice the rhetorical question here. In other words, what is it that I have to say to prove my undying love for you? And then she'll go there. No, she'll actually go there theologically, religiously, spiritually, biblically. She'll go there. She says, as well as Jesus? Well, of course, this is borderline, if not absolute blasphemy. In other words, she says, I'm going to say that as much as Jesus loved all men, I love you just that much. And then she'll say, prove it me, that he loved men as I love thee. In other words, she even goes one step further, and she seems to suggest, no, I actually love you more than Jesus Christ ever loved anybody. Jesus Christ, the one who died on a cross in Christian theology for all of humanity's sins. She says, I love you even more than that. Again, the hyperbolic language is, I think, self-evident here. What are we going to do with this short little poem at 2A, Messages? I think her argument is, she is obviously stating it powerfully, maybe overstating it, but her argument is that love is powerful, right? Love is powerful. At 2B, well, obviously, again, you have this kind of hyperbolic language. Some will call it sacrilegious. You get to decide. And there is that rhetorical question as well, I think, that's involved. At 3A, to connect this with another text, I'm thinking now, I mentioned, of course, Browning's How Do I Love Thee sonnet, but I want to go to Anne Bradstreet's To My Dear and Loving Husband, a title that we've studied together, full lectures at learnstrong.net. Hey guys, do you remember in that poem that she says how much she loves her husband, right? And yet when we read that poem, we have a tendency to think that maybe there's a bit of satire or irony going on there. That in fact, she is saying how much she loves him to make sure that he's happy with what she's saying, how much she loves him. And in fact, she may not in fact love him as much as she is saying. I'm going to leave it to you to decide if this poem is read that way or not for you. Finally, at 3B, do you have anybody in your life that you've ever been able to say, that you love them with this level of attention and love. And how do you read this poem? Do you read it as an overstatement, or do you read it as passionate love statements? Thank you.